South Korean President Yoon doubles down on the country's alliance with the U.S. as he visits a symbolic memorial of the bilateral alliance in Hawaii on his way to Washington for the NATO Summit later this week. Russia launched a major missile attack across Ukraine on Monday, killing at least 37 people, with one destroying a large children's hospital. The attack came just a day before Western leaders gathered in Washington, D.C. for the NATO meeting. Amid calls for President Biden to step aside among some Democrats for his re-election bid, the U.S. president says he's firmly committed to staying in the race and calls for unity within his party. It's July 9th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. President Yoon began his trip to Hawaii by visiting a symbolic memorial cemetery where he paid his respects to Korean War veterans. This aligns with his visit to the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command set for tomorrow as stakes are high on the Korean Peninsula. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports from on the ground.
Kicking off his U.S. trip in Hawaii on Monday, President Yoon visited the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, also informally known as the Punch Bowl. Around 10,000 Korean War veterans and their families have been laid to rest there, including Benjamin Wilson, who received a U.S. Medal of Honor for his courageous actions during the war.
President Yoon expressed the highest respect for the noble sacrifice and dedication of the U.S. veterans who willingly gave their lives for the freedom and peace of South Korea when the fate of the nation was at stake over 70 years ago.
This could be seen as a build-up to the main reason he's stopping by Hawaii before heading to Washington, D.C. for the NATO Summit. President Yoon, on day 2 of his trip, will visit the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command here in Honolulu, where he'll be briefed by the commander regarding ongoing security issues in the region. It's the first time for a South Korean president to visit the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command since it changed its name from the Pacific Command back in 2018. And if you count the Pacific Command as well, it's the first time in 29 years.
U.S. INDOPACOM covers the Indo-Pacific region, 52% of the Earth's surface, and has the largest responsibility among 6 regional unified combatant commands. U.S. Forces Korea is also under this command, so it has a pivotal role in peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Meanwhile, the largest daily newspaper in Hawaii, the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, had President Yoon's visit on its first page this morning, emphasizing his visit to the U.S. INDOPACOM. The paper focused on regional security issues, especially with Russia and North Korea's strengthened military cooperation, as well as Russia and China's naval cooperation. Also, while in Hawaii, President Yoon took the time to meet overseas Koreans. Hawaii is where the first South Korean immigrants moved to 120 years ago to start the history of Korean Americans. He showed his appreciation for them and vowed to better support overseas Koreans going forward. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, Honolulu.
Up next, our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young takes a closer look at the significance of the president's upcoming trip to the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, as we just heard.
President Yoon will signal South Korea's commitment to enhancing regional and global security as North Korea and Russia's military collaboration threatens peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. As President Yoon travels to Washington, D.C. for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's annual summit, he's stopping by Honolulu, Hawaii. The island state is home to the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, which covers about half of the Earth's surface, including the Korean Peninsula, where some 28,500 U.S. troops are stationed. According to Yoo Ji-yoon, research fellow at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses, the president's visit to the command headquarters on Tuesday will not only prove the strength of the 70-year-old South Korea-U.S. alliance, but Seoul's growing role as a contributor to global security.
It underscored South Korea's dedication to countering threats from North Korea and China while aligning with broader international defense strategies. By engaging with both Indo-Pacific Command and NATO, President Yoon highlights the interconnected nature of Indo-Pacific and transatlantic security, promoting a comprehensive defense strategy. This conveys a message of solidarity and cooperation with the key military alliances, reinforcing South Korea's position as a pivotal security partner committed to maintaining stability and peace on a global scale.
Controlling the US's key strategic assets, such as aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines and bombers, the Indo-Pacific Command plays a crucial role in enabling military cooperation between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo to deter North Korea's nuclear and missile threat to regional security. Three-way activities have increased since plans to institutionalize trilateral security cooperation were agreed upon at Camp David last year.
3 countries have conducted more frequent and complex military drills, demonstrating a unified stance against a regional threat like North Korea's missile test. There has been a notable increase in real-time information sharing, bolstering their collective situational awareness and response capabilities. Additionally, collaborative efforts in missile defense have intensified, focusing on interoperability and combined defense strategies.
Given the mounting threat posed by North Korea and its recent treaty with Russia on military cooperation, as well as suspected weapons delivery, Yoon says the 3 Indo-Pacific partners have space to collaborate further on the maritime front.
The navies of South Korea, the US, and Japan could enhance joint maritime patrols and surveillance to monitor and deter illicit activities. Strengthening interoperability through regular advanced neighbor exercises would improve coordinated responses to any threat. Establishing a shared intelligence network would ensure real-time information exchange, which is crucial for tracking adversarial movement.
President Yoon's office says the leaders' visit to Honolulu and Washington, D.C. is aimed at strengthening South Korea's security through global cooperation. Based on the solidarity, Seoul will aim to expand its scope of security cooperation to economic and technological partnerships with like-minded countries. 오수영, Arirang News, Honolulu.
President Yoon and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida meet on the sidelines of the NATO Summit this week. Now, that's according to a South Korean presidential official on Monday in Honolulu. The official said that Yoon is likely to meet with leaders from 10 or more countries while he is in Washington, D.C. to attend the multilateral summit, including Germany, Canada, the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, and the Czech Republic, the United Kingdom, and Japan. The meeting between Yoon and Kishida would be their second summit this year, amid growing concerns over Russia and North Korea's recent treaty to aid each other militarily in the face of aggression. The official added there will be various statements criticizing Moscow and Pyongyang at the NATO summit, including documents by NATO, the United States, and 4 Indo-Pacific partner countries, including South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. NATO summit this week takes place at a crucial time as Ukraine continues to fight against Russian aggression, while leaders are expected to seek ways to deal with China. Our foreign affairs correspondent Yoon explains more about what to expect and what's different this year.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded in 1949 to counter the Soviet Union during the Cold War. 12 countries, including the US, Canada, and 10 from Europe, signed the treaty at the time. This year, NATO marks 75 years since its founding and has now grown into the world's biggest military organization with 32 members. The leaders of these member states are set to meet this week in Washington, D.C. for 3 days, starting Tuesday. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the summit, which comes at a critical time for European security, will focus on 3 major topics. First is providing more support to Ukraine. As the NATO chief arrived at the Pentagon in Washington on Monday local time, he said Russia must accept a solution where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign nation.
At the summit, we'll make decisions to further strengthen our support to Ukraine, and Russia must understand that they're not able to wait those out.
He also said the leaders will also address boosting NATO's defense and deterrence, as well as investment, noting that he welcomes a record of 23 allies making the decision to invest at least 2% of their GDP in defense. Also on the agenda will be NATO's efforts to strengthen its global partnerships, especially in the Indo-Pacific region.
We also have the leaders of our Asia-Pacific partners, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea, present at the summit. That demonstrates that our security is not regional, our security is global.
Last week, Japanese media reported that NATO is planning to release its first joint document on expanding security cooperation with 4 Asia-Pacific nations, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, in an apparent move to counter military threats from China. The document is expected to contain detailed information on cooperation frameworks between NATO and the 4 countries, including cybersecurity and disinformation. This week's summit will be Stoltenberg's last as he hands over the reins to the outgoing Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte. Last month, NATO appointed Rutte as its new Secretary General to lead the organization starting in October. Meanwhile, the summit is the first since Sweden and Finland formally joined NATO. Sweden officially became the group's 32nd member in March, and Finland joined the organization in April 2023. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
And just a day before this high-stakes meeting over in Washington, Russia conducted airstrike across Ukraine on Monday, killing at least 37 people. One has stricken a major children's hospital. Cha Eun-kyung has the latest.
Russia launched large-scale airstrikes across Ukraine on Monday before U.S. President Joe Biden welcomes NATO leaders to Washington. Citing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, CNN reported that at least 37 people were killed and 170 others injured. The strikes damaged nearly 100 buildings, including multiple schools and a maternity hospital. Among the facilities that were hit was the country's main children's hospital, Akhmedit in Kyiv, which left civilians buried under rubble. As search and rescue operations continued into Tuesday, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said that 7 of the 16 injured are children. Another hospital was also struck in the Ukrainian capital, as authorities say at least 27 people were killed in the capital alone. The Ukrainian Air Force says that cruise missiles, guided and air-launched ballistic missiles were used in the deadly airstrikes, adding that 30 of the 38 were shot down. Monday's attack targeting Kyiv came after about 4 months since the last one. Klitschko condemned the Russian attack, calling it one of the worst since the Russian invasion. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a joint press conference with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Warsaw, Russia, as well as Russian President Vladimir Putin, who ordered the airstrikes, must be held accountable for what he called an act of terror. The United Nations Security Council will be set to hold an emergency meeting. Cha Eun-kyung, Arirang News.
U.S. President Joe Biden has called for unity within his party for his re-election campaign, as more Democrats call for him to step aside following the recent debate fallout. Moon Hye-ryun covers his remarks.
U.S. President Joe Biden is fighting back against criticism of his mental fitness and viability following a poor debate performance against Donald Trump last month. In a 2-page letter sent to congressional Democrats on Monday, Biden emphasized that he is firmly committed to staying in the race and to beating Donald Trump. He added that it is time to come together, move forward as a unified party, and that any weakening of resolve would only serve to help Trump. On the same day, he also called into MSNBC's Morning Joe program, where he claimed that he had the support of the average Democrat and challenged his critics in the party. The White House press secretary denied speculation that the president is being treated for Parkinson's disease, while other party figures such as Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries voiced support for Biden after 4 congressmen reportedly held a group call with him, urging their current candidate to step aside. The Democratic caucus meeting is due to take place on Tuesday for the first time since the June 27 debate and could prove a pivotal moment for the path forward. According to CNN, Biden has personally reached out to several Democrats to reassure them that he is aware of the current concerns within the party. He is also set to meet virtually with the Congressional Black Caucus, his strongest bloc of supporters in Congress, as well as members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. The members of the CBC have defended Biden since the debate, with black voters being key to Biden's campaign as he chose the first black female vice president and nominated the first black woman to be a Supreme Court justice. With just over a month left until the Democratic National Convention, during which the party's presidential candidate is officially nominated, and 4 months until the U.S. presidential elections, this is a critical period for Biden's campaign. Moon Tae-ryun, Arirang News.
A North Korean delegation of military education officials departed Pyongyang on Monday for Russia. The departure was carried by the regime's state-run media, which added the delegation was being led by Kim Geum-chul, the head of the Kim Il-sung Military University. Details regarding the delegation's agenda in Russia were not disclosed. Speaking to the press pool here in South Korea earlier on this Tuesday, an official at the Unification Ministry claimed any action in violation of UN Security Council sanctions will be addressed accordingly. On local politics, President Yoon today vetoed the bill led by the opposition, calling for a special investigation into the death of a Marine last summer. The top office said it's been politically motivated. Our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo explains.
President Yoon Suk-yeol vetoed on Tuesday the bill calling for a special prosecutor's investigation into the death of a young Marine in 2023, returning it to the National Assembly for reconsideration. This comes 5 days after the Assembly passed the opposition-led bill amid a ruling People Power Party walkout and protest. In an official announcement, the presidential office said the bill must be withdrawn following the police announcing the results of their investigation the day before, which revealed substantial truth and who was responsible. It added, while delivering consolatory words to the Marine's family, that there should be no more politically motivated abuse of the unfortunate death. This marks the 15th time that President Yoon has exercised his presidential right to veto, and the first since the launch of the current 22nd National Assembly. The president turned down an earlier version of the special probe bill passed by the previous 21st Assembly in May. The bill was returned to the parliament the same month, but was dropped after failing to meet the threshold for a second approval, which is majority attendance and 2/3 or more approvals from lawmakers present at the plenary session. The contentious bill calls for an investigation into the death of a Marine Corps corporal, surnamed Che, who died during last summer's flood rescue operations, and alleged government interference with a preliminary investigation into the case. Since it was passed last week, the ruling People Power Party and the cabinet have requested the president reject the bill. President Yoon, currently on a trip to the U.S., delivered the veto from Hawaii. Immediately following the rejection, the opposition parties at the National Assembly held a rally to protest it. They are now vowing for a second approval that can overcome the presidential veto threshold. But the ruling party said the opposition should stop using the case for political strife and that the presidential rejection was an obvious decision considering the bill's violation of the Constitution. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
The government will ask car manufacturers to seek ways to attach cameras near pedals to identify the exact causes of repetitive car accidents here in the country, allegedly from sudden acceleration or brake failure. The Transport Ministry said on Tuesday it plans to advise domestic and foreign car manufacturers to attach cameras to vehicles sold here. But it added that it will not be mandatory, as this could raise car costs and lead to trade conflicts. It is also reviewing ways to induce drivers to install the cameras and reduce car insurance payments for those who do so. In other news, Korea's first digital agricultural complex based on AI technology is in operation in the city of Daju in the Jeollanam-do province. Our Yoon has a look.
This tractor is unmanned, but it moves along the field automatically and prepares the land for farming. After completing its task, a drone returns to its base to switch out its battery and to get refilled with pesticide. In the mini greenhouse where seedlings are raised, robots take care of the seedlings and organize the seedling trays. From seedling management to crop harvesting and supplying water, the various robots carrying out these tasks are controlled in the control room of this high-tech, unmanned automated agricultural production demo complex.
We plan to show the core essence of smart agriculture through this unmanned automated demo complex. Moving forward with smart agriculture, I believe we can come up with such innovative measures to reduce production costs as well as labor shortage problems.
The unmanned automated agricultural production demo complex has been operating since 2020 with an investment of around $28.8 million. Its main goal was to create a smart agricultural model. It is the first digital agricultural complex in the country to integrate AI technology.
Smart agriculture can also be an alternative to overcoming climate change. So in the current reality of agriculture in rural areas, smart agriculture may be an important direction for us to go in.
The agricultural population is not only declining, but is also aging. The setup of unmanned automated agriculture production complexes in such rural areas is expected to become an outpost for open field smart agriculture. Yoon, Arirang News.
As heavy rain is predicted again overnight, a preliminary heavy rain warning is issued for most parts of the country. Early tomorrow morning, monsoon rain is expected to expand to the southern parts of the country. Heavy rain of more than 150 millimeters is expected in the southern areas of Gyeonggi-do province and the Chungcheong-do provinces, parts of Jeollanam-do province and Gyeongsang-do provinces. More than 120 is expected for the Seoul metropolitan area and Jeollabuk-do province until tomorrow. Tomorrow, most areas will start off at least 22 degrees Celsius. It will move up to 30 in Seoul, Chuncheon and Jeju, 29 degrees. This rainy season will continue in the south and on Jeju Island in the second half of the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arirang TV is conducting a quality and satisfaction evaluation to enhance the broadcast service for viewers worldwide. Please visit our website www.arirang.com to provide your honest opinions. Participants will be entered into a draw for a chance to win prizes. Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
날 둘러싼 이 풍경이 다 너를
The highly anticipated NATO Summit will kick off today in Washington, D.C., bringing together 38 heads of delegation, including President Yoon Suk-yeol. It'll mark President Yoon's third consecutive attendance, highlighting the strengthening ties between South Korea and NATO amid increasing global security challenges. While NATO's expanded partnerships and aid to Ukraine are expected to dominate the summit, considerable attention is also on the message President Yoon will deliver regarding the growing North Korea-Russia arms cooperation and the level of South Korea's contribution in assisting Ukraine's fight against Russia. On this edition of Within the Frame, we preview the summit with a particular focus on South Korea's participation and the implications of an enhanced Korea-NATO partnership. For some insights, Min Jung-hoon, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, now joins me in the studio. It's always great to have you with us.
My pleasure always.
Also with us tonight is John Nilsson-Wright, head of Center for Geopolitics, Japan and Korea's program at the University of Cambridge. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be back as always.
And Dr. Nilsson-Wright, let's kick things off with you. As I mentioned at the top, this will mark President Yoon's third consecutive attendance at the NATO Summit, which is unprecedented for a South Korean president. Amid signs of the Korean Peninsula emerging as a front line of a new Cold War, according to some, what significance does President Yoon's attendance hold?
Well, I think probably the main thing to stress is that South Korea is signaling very deliberately that its security contribution is global. It's not purely regional. The third time, as you say, attending a NATO summit. The visit today to the US Indo-Pacific Command in Honolulu is, I think, another further confirmation of the close ties between the US and Japan. Obviously, the Indo-Pacific Command is important because it provides the critical deterrence capabilities of the United States designed to address the challenge of North Korea. But in terms of the meeting in Washington for the NATO summit, I think it's useful to stress just how many individual countries' leaders President Yoon will be engaging with. We're expecting no fewer than 10 meetings. He will, of course, also meet with the so-called Indo-Pacific Four, a quadrilateral grouping that brings together South Korea, Japan, of course, Australia, and New Zealand, who are all attending this summit. And we've seen also ahead of the meeting some telegraphing of possible cooperation. In September of this year, we may see a NATO ROK cyber defense security initiative. All of this, I think, is designed to send a very clear message that the world is unified in addressing global challenges, and Korea plays a critically important part in that. And of course, we've seen very strong public declarations by the South Korean government, by President Yoon and other officials about the importance of supporting Ukraine in ways that are going to be meaningful and will enhance its security in the face of what has been a very difficult few weeks and months for the Ukrainian government.
And we'll discuss more in detail about South Korea's role as we move on. But before that, Professor Min, as Dr. Nilsson-Wright briefly mentioned, President Yoon is in Hawaii, and he's dropping by Hawaii before he heads to Washington, D.C. for the summit to pay respect to Korean War veterans and also to visit the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. What is the importance of the visit?
Yes, and President Yoon will attend the NATO summit this Wednesday and Thursday in Washington, and there he will meet with the NATO leaders to discuss the ongoing Ukraine war and the enhancing cooperation between NATO and the Indo-Pacific 4 countries, IP4 countries. And before the summit, President Yoon is stopping by Hawaii on Monday and Tuesday to pay respect to Korean War veterans and visit the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Specifically, in order to pay respect to the Korean War veterans, President Yoon will visit the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, nicknamed the Punch Bowl, after its dramatic setting like the crater. And it's the final resting place for about 53,000 war veterans and their dependents. And meanwhile, President Yoon will also visit the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, which is one of 6 geographic combatant commands of the United States, and it covers more of the globe of any of the other commands and shares the borders with all of the other 5 commands. So President Yoon's visit to the Punchbowl National Cemetery will be an opportunity to remember the historic significance of the alliance between South Korea and U.S. and will show the highest respect to the Korean War veterans. In addition, his visit to the Indo-Pacific Command will demonstrate the strong alliance and provide an opportunity to elevate the bilateral cooperation for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific.
Sacrifices made by Korean War veterans, something that we should never, ever forget. And as President Yoon, as South Korea ramps up its security defense cooperation with the U.S., it's also ramping up closer partnership with NATO. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg has recently stated that South Korea is a highly regarded partner. And he said that the closer that authoritarian actors align, the more important it is for NATO to work closely with its friends in the Indo-Pacific. What does boosted partnership with NATO mean for South Korea?
Well, the enhancing security cooperation between NATO and the Indo-Pacific 4 countries shows that global security environment is changing. Specifically, it is getting more connected to each other. So the main agendas of this upcoming NATO summit includes assistance to Ukraine and NATO's deterrence and defense and the partnerships with the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific countries. And specifically partnerships show that NATO want to work closely with its friends in the Indo-Pacific. And the NATO leaders perceive that NATO could be stronger and safer when it stands with like-minded countries to defend the rules-based international order. And that's why NATO is enhancing cooperation with its Indo-Pacific partners. And as you know, the ongoing Ukraine war clearly shows that Russia is the immediate threat to the NATO member states. And it is known that North Korea is providing ammunition and other military weapons to Russia, and China is silently also helping Russia by providing military supplies and equipment. So along with IP4 countries, the economic support and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, NATO wants enhance cooperation, security cooperation with the IP4 countries to cope with the increasing security threats posed by Russia, North Korea, and possibly China. Meanwhile, increasing military cooperation between Russia and North Korea also continue to make the security situation on the Korean Peninsula grave. So we can see that partners in Europe and in the Pacific have a security interest in common, and they want to enhance their security cooperation in order to cope with the changing security environment.
And have relations between South Korea and NATO improved, further strengthened since their signing of the ITPP last year, a tailored program to further boost their partnership across 11 areas?
Well, as you mentioned, there is a possibility that the NATO member states and the IP4 countries will be agreed to enhance their cooperation through the existing programs. But we need to see a little bit subtle differences that the NATO and IP4 countries have in terms of the coping with Russia, North Korea, and China. You know, NATO member states like England and France and Germany, they have lots of interest in involving in the Indo-Pacific region, but they have a different interest respectively, in terms of getting involved in the Indo-Pacific. For example, France has got the most the military or the security the interest regarding to the Indo-Pacific the region, because it has many the territories around the Indo-Pacific. Meanwhile, England and Germany, they don't have much in the military or the security interest in the Indo-Pacific. And Germany has got the most economic connection with China, so they have a little different threat perceptions in terms of its relations with China. So the NATO countries, NATO member countries, and IPFL countries, they don't have the direct threat perceptions or direct interest in terms of engaging in the traditional security and military operations or the cooperation. Instead, they have some common interest in non-traditional security matters like cybersecurity and the sharing information and like the emerging technology cooperation or something like that. So I think that at the upcoming summit, they will talk about those issues mainly, and possibly they will have some agreed statement after the summit.
And Dr. Nilsson Wright, aid to Ukraine will likely top the agenda, and NATO is expected to endorse a new initiative for Ukraine during this week's summit in Washington, dubbed the NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine. Well, not everyone seems to be satisfied with the new effort. What are your prospects?
Well, I mean, perhaps one of the most important things to stress is the political dimension here, where we have, of course, a weakened American president because of all of the concerns about President Biden's health. It will be very important at this NATO summit for the United States to demonstrate that it can provide the sort of leadership that NATO is looking for. A large concern, of course, about the NATO gathering is putting in place institutional mechanisms for cooperation and support for Ukraine that will, if you like, future-proof the NATO initiative against the possibility of a Trump victory in November. On the back of the recent election in France in the National Assembly, there will, I think, be a great sense of relief that the far right, Marine Le Pen's party, was not as successful as people expected, because that would have raised questions about the sustainability of French commitment to the NATO effort in Ukraine and French support for Vladimir Zelensky. And of course, we've just had a government elected in Britain. John Healey, our new defense secretary, has visited Kyiv, has met President Zelensky. And so there are efforts undergoing by a number of countries to reinforce their commitment. The nature of the NATO new security initiative is designed, I think, not only to enhance cooperation amongst the 32 NATO members, but to reach out to partners in the Indo-Pacific, particularly South Korea, to strengthen additional forms of assistance and cooperation. But one of the things that I think is very striking and which will be announced is the establishment of a NATO military headquarters in Wiesbaden in Germany that will provide training for some 700 personnel or so to support Ukraine's efforts. And there is some speculation that we may see a decision by the United States to deploy military advisors to provide further technical assistance to the Ukraine on the ground. That raises interesting questions about the, if you like, the mission creep, the possibility that the United States will become more firmly embedded in the war in Ukraine. And as we saw with those very distressing photographs just yesterday of the Russian attack on a Ukrainian hospital in Kyiv, there are, I think, increasing pressures on NATO and other NATO members to do more to support Ukraine in this very difficult time. The possibility that that will expand is raising, I think, concerns in some quarters about the risk of escalation and expansion of the military conflict. So this will be a very delicate balance. It will require cooperation between NATO members and non-NATO members. And I think President Yoon will want to demonstrate his appreciation of the gravity of the situation. And as your previous speaker was indicating, think about the broader range of non-traditional forms of security cooperation. Support, for example, for expansion of arms exports to other countries, not to Ukraine specifically, but other countries who can then in turn provide their own indigenous support for the efforts of the Ukrainian military to resist Russia's aggression.
Stoltenberg has recently highlighted the legality of South Korea's weapons aid to Ukraine, pointing out that it should not be equated with North Korea's suspected munitions delivery to Russia, as Russia's invasion is illegal. Do you anticipate detailed discussions between Stoltenberg and President Yoon regarding Seoul's weapons aid to Ukraine?
Well, Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-hyo has been very clear in telegraphing before the President's visit that there will be substantial discussions. And there's no doubt that the public statements by Jens Stoltenberg have emphasized that Korea undoubtedly has a role to play. Stoltenberg has made it clear that Korea is seen as a global actor, and it's quite legitimate for it to be involved in these active discussions. But I think for reasons that are I think, quite sensible, the South Korean government is going to limit its assistance to Ukraine directly in the form of humanitarian assistance and not direct military support. Having said that, of course, the government of South Korea is very alive to the increased military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. President Yoon has made it very clear that South Korea's support for Ukraine will be in part influenced by the extent to which Russia and North Korea increase their own cooperation. And just today, there's news reports from Seoul highlighting the dispatch of a high-level military delegation from North Korea to Russia. The worry, of course, is that this presages and anticipates perhaps closer military-to-military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang. I don't think we're yet there in terms of concrete military assistance, but there is talk of training. There is talk of possible North Korean workers being involved in providing construction support for the Russian effort in the Donbass, for example. And President Yoon is trying to signal, I think unambiguously, that Russia and North Korea have to be careful about the full extent of their partnership, because it may then militate a stronger response from South Korea. But for now, the response in terms of NATO ROK collaboration is going to be in these broader areas, including humanitarian assistance and broader technical cooperation.
And in related question, Professor Min, South Korea has made quite bold remarks after North Korea and Russia signed a new military pact. It said that the pact lifts all restrictions of South Korea's aid to Ukraine, hinting at the possibility that provision of lethal weapons to Ukraine could also be on the table. Now, Dr. Nielsen Wright has mentioned that that will be very unlikely, and South Korea's aid to Ukraine will likely remain limited to humanitarian assistance. How do you gauge the chances of South Korea actually providing lethal weapons to Ukraine?
Yes, and personally, I also agree that the South Korea will not provide the lethal weapons to Ukraine. And what Seoul mentions such a possibility is just a diplomatic warning against Russia that it should not cross the red line in terms of its relationship with South Korea. And it is known that North Korea is receiving energy, food, and other economic support from Russia in return for providing ammunition and military weapons to Russia. And it is also suspected, but not confirmed, that Russia is providing North Korea with 1-point lessons for the advanced military technologies like the military spy satellites. And signing the new military pact between North Korea and Russia means that they will definitely increase their military cooperation. So it could pose a greater security threat to South Korea, and therefore South Korea had to send a strong signal to Russia that it is going too far. Meanwhile, it is reported that South Korea could increase its military support for Ukraine at the upcoming summit, like providing military electronic warfare equipment and surveillance drones to Ukraine, and offering such non-lethal military equipment and supplies could be uncomfortable but would it be acceptable by Russia because South Korea does not cross the red line in terms of its relations with Russia? And that it would also contribute to enhancing South Korea's international standing as a global pivotal state, that it takes more responsibility for the global security and stability.
This marks President Yoon's first multilateral summit since North Korea and Russia signed a new defense treaty. What message would he send out to the Western alliance and the world?
Again, increasing military cooperation between North Korea and Russia poses a greater security concern to South Korea, and it also gives the security concern to NATO member states because North Korea's military weapons are being used in Ukraine. So it is likely that President Yoon will share the information about the military cooperation between North Korea and Russia with the NATO leaders, and they will together strongly blame such illegal military cooperation. And at this point, it's not clear what measures they will agree to take, but there is a possibility that they will impose further sanctions against North Korea and Russia. And they could also agree to enhance their security cooperation, like sharing military confidential information, cybersecurity, and countering disinformation, and defense industrial cooperation. So we will see what agreements they will actually reach at the upcoming summit.
And Dr. Nilsson Wright, countering China's growing influence in the region will also be discussed. And on that note, along with President Yoon, leaders of Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, NATO's key Indo-Pacific partners have also been invited. What is South Korea's role in helping like-minded nations keep China in check?
Well, China, of course, is part of the bigger strategic challenge that all countries in the Indo-Pacific are grappling with. We've seen South Korean forces participating in the so-called RIMPAC, the Rim of the Pacific exercises, which have started and will last until August of this year. This is, I think, an important opportunity for enhanced military-to-military coordination, joint exercises, and at a smaller level, but equally important, both practically and symbolically, trilateral cooperation between South Korea, Japan, and the United States. That's very much a response, of course, to the direct challenge of the DPRK, but it also provides real opportunities for improved coordination between the militaries of the three countries. And that builds, of course, on the hugely important Camp David agreement from last year. Much of the work, I think, by the South Korean government to address those are reflected, for example, in the possibility of South Korea maybe becoming a participant in Pillar 2 of the AUKUS initiative. This is still something that is yet to be agreed. And we've seen, of course, also discussions about defense military technology cooperation. The Ministry of Defense, the South Korean Ministry of Defense, will be holding a conference this week in Canberra, which will talk about military-to-military cooperation between South Korean defense industrial contractors and their Australian counterparts. Vice Minister of Defense will himself travel to Australia to engage in those discussions. There are many areas short of formal direct military relationships where there is room for both technical, strategic, and economic mutual benefits for Australia and for South Korea. And that's true of other relationships. We might expect also a greater appetite for the sharing of intelligence, again, to address the threat of the DPRK, but also it has a knock-on effect in terms of addressing the wider challenge of China. However, of course, notwithstanding the real military concerns about China's expansion in the East and South China Seas, South Korea, of course, has a very important economic relationship with China. We saw that reinforced in the recent trilateral summit in Seoul between the Japanese, Chinese, and South Korean leaders. And on the back of that came a commitment by both Seoul and Beijing to explore the possibility of establishing a 2+2 defense and foreign ministry level dialogue between China and the ROK. So the South Korean position will be to both guard against long-term strategic challenges, but also maintain the importance of cooperation and dialogue with China. That's important, not only, of course, because of the economic relationship, but because of long-standing political and diplomatic ties between Beijing and Seoul. And in this context, of course, China is important because it provides an opportunity to exert influence on the DPRK. So in other words, as the challenge from North Korea becomes more acute, because of that closer cooperation between Russia and North Korea, South Korea will be looking to try and persuade the Chinese to exert their own influence on Pyongyang in an effort to restrain the North Korean leadership and to mitigate against the risk of enhanced security tension between the two Koreas.
Well, it looks like South Korea will need a very smart, pragmatic, and solid strategies to boost ties with the Western alliance, with NATO, while maintaining cordial relations with its important Asian neighbor, China. And that is where we'll conclude our discussion today. Thank you so much, Dr. Nilsson Wright, as always, for sharing your insights. And many thanks to you as well, Professor Min, for your thorough analysis.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.